What the hell is that supposed to be? Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane's voice cut through the humid North Carolina air like a blade. The 29-year-old Delta Force operator wasn't looking at the advanced weapons systems scattered across Fort Bragg's most classified training compound. His cold blue eyes were fixed on the old man mopping floors near the equipment lockers, specifically at the faded ink barely visible on the man's weathered left forearm. The tattoo looked like something from decades past, crude lines that had blurred with age into an indecipherable mess of black and gray that resembled a dagger with wings, though the details were lost to time and sun damage. Kane had seen plenty of amateur tattoos during his 8 years in special operations, but this one looked particularly pathetic on the arm of a janitor. Harold Hank Morrison, 79 years old, continued his methodical work without acknowledging the comment. His movements were deliberate and efficient, the way a man works when he's been doing the same job for years and takes pride in doing it right. He wore his usual faded red work shirt that had seen countless wash cycles, blue jeans with permanent stains from industrial cleaning supplies, and worn work boots that had walked more miles than most soldiers would cover in a lifetime. The tattoo on his left forearm was indeed faded, its original design nearly lost to decades of exposure. To the casual observer, it looked like the regrettable decision of a young man who had too much to drink and too little sense. Kane was anything but a casual observer. He was Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, the absolute pinnacle of military excellence. His unit didn't officially exist. Their missions were classified beyond most generals' clearance levels, and their training was so intense that Navy SEALs washed out regularly. Kane had earned his place through years of grueling selection processes and combat deployments that would break ordinary soldiers. The idea that some elderly janitor with a trashy tattoo was sharing the same airspace in their sacred training facility offended his professional sensibilities. "Seriously, old man," Kane continued, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had never learned respect. "What kind of backyard artist gave you that masterpiece? Looks like someone tried to tattoo you with a rusty nail and motor oil." Several other operators looked up from their equipment maintenance, sense and entertainment. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Chen, and Sergeant Williams all shared Kane's dismissive attitude toward the cleaning staff. These weren't ordinary soldiers either. They were Tier 1 operators who had earned their places through exceptional service. Morrison paused in his mopping, not turning around, but allowing his shoulders to straighten slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet dignity that seemed out of place. "Just something I got a long time ago, son. Nothing that would interest you." The response only encouraged Kane's mockery. "A long time ago? What, did you get it in county lockup? Or maybe at some truck stop tattoo parlor during your Vietnam protest days?" The other operators chuckled appreciatively, enjoying their sergeant's wit at the old man's expense. Morrison slowly began rolling up his sleeve, revealing more of the faded design. "Vietnam," he said quietly, but not protesting. Kane's laughter grew louder and more dismissive. "Vietnam? Let me guess, you were one of those rear echelon guys who never left the base, got drunk one night and thought a tattoo would make you look tough?" The other Delta operators joined in the mockery, their expensive tactical gear and modern weapons creating a stark contrast to the humble janitor with his mop and bucket. Morrison continued working, but something had changed in his posture. The slight stoop of an elderly maintenance worker was gradually straightening into something that looked suspiciously like military bearing. "Actually," Morrison said, his voice still calm, but carrying an undertone that made Sergeant Rodriguez pause his equipment check, "I was with Mac V. Sog, Studies and Observations Group." The laughter stopped abruptly. Even Kane, for all his arrogance, knew that name. Mac V. Sog was legendary among Special Operations Forces, the most classified, most dangerous unit to operate during the Vietnam War. They conducted missions so secret that their existence was denied for decades after the war ended. Morrison rolled his sleeve higher, revealing more of the tattoo. What had appeared to be crude amateur work was actually a faded but unmistakable insignia, a winged dagger with distinctive cross-hatching beneath it, the unofficial symbol of MACV-SOG reconnaissance teams. Kane's confidence wavered slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Bullshit, old man. SOG guys don't end up mopping floors. You probably saw that symbol in some war movie and decided to copy it." Morrison turned around for the first time, and the Delta operators got their first clear look at his face. His eyes weren't the tired, defeated look of a career janitor. They were the sharp, alert eyes of someone who had seen things and done things that most people couldn't imagine. "Son," Morrison said quietly, "I didn't copy anything. This tattoo was done in Da Nang in 1968. The night before my team inserted into Cambodia for a mission that officially never happened." Morrison's mind drifted to that night 55 years ago. He was 24, a staff sergeant with the 5th Special Forces Group, assigned to the most dangerous missions in Southeast Asia. The tattoo parlor was a hole-in-the-wall establishment frequented by soldiers who knew they might not survive their next mission. The artist was a former Marine who understood the significance of what he was inking into young soldiers' skin. Morrison remembered the needle sting, the smell of antiseptic, and the weight of knowing that tomorrow he would parachute into enemy territory with 5 other men on a mission to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The tattoo wasn't decoration, it was identification, a way to ensure that if his body was recovered, people would know he had served with the most elite unit in Vietnam. Back in the present, Morrison looked directly at Kane. "We called ourselves the Prairie Fire Teams. Cross-border operations into Cambodia and Laos, hunting NVA supply convoys and command posts. 30-day missions with no support, no extraction guarantee, and no official recognition if we were captured or killed." Kane's smirk was fading rapidly. The old man's bearing had completely transformed. Gone was the humble janitor. In his place stood someone who radiated the quiet confidence of a warrior. Staff Sergeant Chin had stopped his weapon maintenance entirely, studying Morrison with new interest. The transformation was remarkable. The elderly janitor had disappeared entirely, replaced by a soldier whose presence filled the room. "You want to know about this tattoo?" Morrison continued, rolling his sleeve to his shoulder. "It represents 6 men who went places that didn't exist, did things that never happened, and came home to a country that couldn't acknowledge what we'd sacrificed." The full tattoo was now visible. The winged dagger was surrounded by smaller symbols, a parachute, jungle boots, and numbers that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to those who understood special operations history. Kane's voice had lost its mocking tone, but retained its arrogance. "Even if that's true, SOG was 50 years ago. This is Delta Force, the modern military. Your old war stories don't mean anything here." Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Modern military? Son, half the tactics your unit uses were developed by SOG teams in jungles where the enemy outnumbered us 50 to 1. He gestured toward their equipment. "Night vision, satellite communications, precision insertion techniques. We were doing all of that with equipment that makes your grandfather's hunting rifle look high-tech." Sergeant Rodriguez found himself drawn into the conversation, despite his better judgment. "What was your longest mission?" Morrison's eyes grew distant. 47 days in the Cambodian highlands, tracking a regiment of NVA regulars. We lived off the land, avoided contact with over 2,000 enemy soldiers, and called in airstrikes that destroyed 3 ammunition dumps and a command bunker. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the most arrogant Delta operators understood the significance of what Morrison was describing. Morrison began rolling his sleeve back down, the tattoo disappearing beneath the faded fabric. "But you're right about one thing, son. I am just a janitor now.
Been cleaning this building for 15 years, and I've never once mentioned my service record to anyone. Kane felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine shame. He had spent the last 10 minutes mocking a man whose combat record made his own achievements look like training exercises. That's when Staff Sergeant Chen's secure phone rang with the sharp, urgent tone reserved for priority communications. Chen answered immediately, his face quickly cycling from curiosity to alarm to something approaching fear. "Yes, sir. At the training facility. Under control, sir. Yes, sir. I understand completely." He hung up, his eyes wide as he looked at Kane. "Gunny, that was Colonel Martinez. He's en route with a full security detail. He asked specifically if anyone had shown disrespect to Master Sergeant Morrison." The blood drained from Kane's face. Master Sergeant. Morrison had been a Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank in the military. And Colonel Martinez was coming personally. Outside, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder, approaching rapidly, the distinct sound of a motorcade on the classified access roads. Morrison picked up his mop and bucket, preparing to continue his work. "The difference between your generation and mine," he said quietly, "is that we didn't need to tell everyone how tough we were. We just did the job."
The convoy screeched to a halt outside the compound with the urgency of a combat response. Heavy doors slammed and the sound of military boots on concrete echoed through the training facility. Kane stood frozen as the outer door burst open with the force of authority. Colonel Martinez strode into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention from every operator present. At 52, Colonel Martinez was a legend in special operations circles, a decorated veteran who had commanded both conventional and special operations forces in multiple combat theaters. His arrival was so unexpected that several operators nearly dropped their weapons in surprise. "Attention!" Kane barked automatically, and every Delta operator snapped to rigid attention. Morrison continued his methodical cleaning, seemingly oblivious to the sudden military formality surrounding him. Colonel Martinez ignored the operators entirely, his eyes scanning the room until they found Morrison. When he spotted the elderly janitor, his entire demeanor changed. The stern, commanding expression softened into something approaching reverence. Colonel Martinez walked directly to Morrison, who looked up from his work with mild curiosity. Then, in a gesture that stunned every operator in the room, the colonel came to rigid attention and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute that anyone present had ever witnessed. "Master Sergeant Harold Morrison, United States Army Special Forces, retired," Colonel Martinez said, his voice booming across the suddenly silent room. "On behalf of the United States Army Special Operations Command, I apologize for the inexcusable disrespect shown to you here today." Morrison slowly returned the salute, movement still precise despite his age. "Colonel, no apology necessary. These men were doing their job as they understood it." The colonel held his salute for 5 full seconds before dropping his hand. He then turned to face the crowd of stunned operators. "Gentlemen," Colonel Martinez announced, his voice carrying across the range, "allow me to introduce Master Sergeant Harold 'Ghost' Morrison. He is a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Purple Hearts. He served 5 tours in Vietnam and Laos with MAC-V-SOG, conducting over 200 classified missions behind enemy lines." Kane felt his knees go weak. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross. He was looking at one of the most decorated soldiers in special operations history. Colonel Martinez continued, his voice growing harder as he looked directly at Kane. "Master Sergeant Morrison's unit, MAC-V-SOG, had a casualty rate exceeding 60%. The fact that he's standing here today makes him part of the most exclusive brotherhood in military history. His call sign was Ghost because the enemy never saw him coming, and when they did, it was already too late." Morrison shifted uncomfortably, his humble nature recoiling from the public praise. Colonel Martinez reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small wooden box. Morrison's eyes widened slightly as he recognized it. "Master Sergeant, this belongs to you.
It was lost in the Pentagon mail system for 30 years and finally found its way to my desk last week. He opened the box, revealing the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. Heroes like you don't get forgotten, Master Sergeant. They just get temporarily misplaced.
Colonel Martinez lifted the Medal of Honor from its case, the blue ribbon and bronze star catching the fluorescent lights. Master Sergeant Harold Morrison, he announced formally, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with Mac V. Sog during Operation Prairie Fire, Cambodia, March 1969. Morrison stood at attention as the colonel continued reading the citation. When his 6-man reconnaissance team was surrounded by an estimated 2 companies of North Vietnamese regulars, Master Sergeant Morrison single-handedly held off the enemy assault for over 6 hours, allowing his wounded teammates to reach the extraction point. Despite being wounded 4 times, he continued to engage superior enemy forces until the last man was evacuated. Kane felt his world tilting on its axis. He had been mocking a Medal of Honor recipient, a man whose courage under fire was officially recognized as extraordinary even by military standards. Colonel Martinez carefully pinned the medal to Morrison's work shirt, the bronze star looking oddly appropriate against the faded red fabric. "The Army lost track of you after your discharge, Master Sergeant. We've been trying to present this properly for 3 decades. Morrison touched the medal gently, his eyes distant with memory. "I never expected to see this again, sir. I figured the paperwork got buried somewhere in the system." Colonel Martinez turned to address the Delta operators, who remained frozen at attention. "Gentlemen, you are looking at one of the most decorated soldiers in Special Operations history. Master Sergeant Morrison's combat record includes operations that are still classified at levels above your clearance." He paused, letting that information sink in. His unit developed many of the unconventional warfare tactics that form the foundation of modern special operations doctrine. Morrison slowly rolled up his sleeve again, revealing the faded tattoo one final time. Colonel Martinez smiled knowingly and began rolling up his own sleeve. As the fabric moved up his arm, another tattoo became visible. The same wing dagger design, but crisp and clear, obviously much newer. "This tattoo, gentlemen," the colonel said, displaying his arm next to Morrison's, "represents membership in the most elite unit ever fielded by American forces. I earned mine in Afghanistan in 2003, carrying on traditions established by men like Master Sergeant Morrison." Kane stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Master Sergeant Morrison, I was completely out of line. I apologize." Morrison gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Son, you were protecting your facility and your men. That's exactly what a good NCO should do. The failure wasn't yours. It was a breakdown in communication up the chain." Colonel Martinez nodded approvingly. "For the next week, Master Sergeant Morrison will conduct advanced unconventional warfare training with this unit. Staff Sergeant Kane, you will assist and coordinate the training schedule." As Morrison prepared to return to his work, now wearing the Medal of Honor on his faded red shirt, Kane finally understood the difference between earning respect and demanding it. The old janitor with the faded tattoo had just taught Delta Force operators a lesson in humility that no training exercise could provide. True warriors, Kane realized, didn't need to announce their credentials. Their actions and their character spoke louder than any words ever could.